Welcome to the Underground Railroad, and how it affected Reynoldsburg and Truro Township. Today we'll talk about the active role that Reynoldsburg residents played in the Underground Railroad. And in the process, you will meet some of the abolitionists of this town who risked their lives to help. What is the Underground Railroad? It's not an underground train like a mine shaft with rails that you can ride through on a miniature locomotive. Nor is it a tunnel under the earth. It's a secret route where slaves could get shelter and food from kind strangers who would hide them. You will discover a few of the places our forefathers used for hiding spots. But first, I want you to get a perspective of the size of this town in the 1800s and the people who settled here. This is a vintage map of the Atlantic Ocean. Do you see the ship in the upper right-hand corner? That ship is sitting on top of Scotland. Before the Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, refugees came to this continent from Scotland. There were two churches in Scotland, the Catholic Church and the National Church of Scotland, which are actually Presbyterians. The Presbyterians came to this continent to escape persecution from the Catholics because their lives were at risk. In other words, the Catholics were killing them. Now, I will enlarge the map of Nova Scotia for you. The refugees from Scotland fought for the Americans during the Revolutionary War, and the federal government could not afford to pay in dollars. So, instead, the refugees were given land. In 1783, land was promised to the Scottish refugees by the new American government. Congress passed a resolution regarding land grants to refugees from Nova Scotia and devised a method of surveying land into plats for disbursement. The only problem was, it would take another 15 years to accomplish all of this. The red dot on this map is Truro, Nova Scotia. Does Truro sound familiar? It should. It's on the side of every fire truck in town. You live in Truro Township. The state is divided into counties, and the counties are divided into townships. Our township was named for the town where the refugees landed when they came to America from Scotland. This map is New Brunswick, Canada, and Northeast America. By landing here, the travelers could cross by land into America. The Revolutionary War ended in 1783, but the land grants weren't available until 1798. That's 15 years. Many families were settled long before the Revolutionary War and didn't want to start over again, so they sold their allotted land, but some took the treacherous journey to Ohio to claim their land. And here they are in central Ohio. This is Ohio. The map was drawn just months after Ohio reached statehood. The Presbyterians who traveled to this area from Scotland called themselves seceders. This means they seceded from the church. There were many reasons they seceded from the church. One reason was that the church believed you had to be a businessman or own a lot of property to be an elder. The seceders thought, no, a farmer can be an elder. You don't have to be wealthy to be dedicated to your church. And the seceders that traveled to Ohio were strong abolitionists. They did not believe in slavery. The first church in Truro Township was built by the seceders in 1817. That was before Reynoldsburg was chartered as a village. In fact, it was not even surveyed to be a village until 1830 or 1831. The white patch you see here in central Ohio is not a band-aid, but it is actually another map. It is a map of the refugee land tract from 1801, and it predates Ohio's statehood. The tract is 4.5 miles wide and 48 miles long and is a total of 58,080 acres of land. The west end starts at the Scioto River in downtown Columbus and goes across 4 counties almost to Zanesville. Each section in the map is approximately 320 acres awarded to soldiers or their widows and families. The blob on the right is a marsh, which was later dammed, and the marsh filled with water and became a large man-made lake called what? Buckeye Lake. What road runs along the southern border of the refugee tract? Refugee Road. Now I am going to enlarge the section pertaining to Reynoldsburg. This map represents part of Range 20 and Range 21. See the Roman numerals at the top. The wiggly line in the middle is Blacklick Creek. In 1813, Daniel Donahue bought 314 acres in half-section 30 from the heirs of Revolutionary War soldier Adam Johnston for $600. In 1816, Donahue bought 3.5 acres from Thomas Palmer. Late in 1816, Donahue sold the 3.5 acres and most of half-section 30 for $850 to John French, who had the land surveyed for a village in 1831. In 1830, James C. Reynolds came from Zanesville behind the men building the National Road, and he decided to stay here. James opened a sutler's store where people could buy dry goods. Since the main post office delivered the village mail to his sutler's store, he became the first postmaster. James was quite a likable young man, so the village folks voted, and he was given the rank of brigadier general in the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He served on the Ohio legislature for 1 term. And when he was just 25 years old, the townsfolk voted to name the village after him in 1831. It became Reynoldsburg. 8 years later, in 1839, the village was officially incorporated as Reynoldsburg. Let's go to the satellite. This is Reynoldsburg as you all know it today, bordered by Broad Street on the north, Taylor Road on the east, Route 70 to the south, and the Outer Belt 270 on the west. But the Reynoldsburg in the 1800s was much smaller. I'm now going to enlarge the highlighted rectangle. See the yellow quadrilateral south of Main Street, where it has 256 in a white oval. Now I will cover it with part of an old map. This is the full map. The red rectangle is the Reynoldsburg Union Academy. Today, the former Hannah J. Ashton School. Now I will take you from the satellite down to the street. This is a shot of Main Street in the historical district today, looking southeast. The upper left corner is east and the lower right heads west. Blacklick Creek would be off-screen at the bottom. This is Main Street. Here we have Connell Hardware, which is now Vic's Pizza, followed by the mural at Lancaster and Main Street. Next is the Hannah J. Ashton School building. Now, we are going to travel back in time around 90 years ago. This is Reynoldsburg in 1935. Why a photo from 1935? Why not earlier? There wasn't any photography in the early 1800s, especially from the air. And between 1850 and 1935, the town hasn't changed that much. Why did you start in 1850? Because that was the first census that I could find. Actually, the town didn't change hardly at all between 1850 and 1930. The population only increased by 223 people. It only increased 415 people in 100 years from 1850 to 1950. Does anybody want to guess what the population was in 1960? After the 1960 census, we were labeled as one of the fastest growing towns in the United States. It was an increase of 976%. And Reynoldsburg was incorporated as a city in 1961. But that's a different presentation. So, now you have an idea of how small this town was, which would make it very difficult to hide someone without your neighbor's knowledge. Because, although many of the settlers were abolitionists, some were not. So what happened to change everything? What invention made the difference? It happened in 1793. Eli Whitney Jr. invented the cotton gin. And according to our history books, the cotton gin was one of the key inventions of the Industrial Revolution that shaped the economy of the antebellum South. Here are some numbers to explain the effect of that invention. In 1791, the South exported 189,000 pounds of cotton. Have you ever held a cotton ball in your hand? How much did it weigh? Can you imagine how much cotton it would take to weigh 189,000 pounds? After the cotton gin was invented, within 8 years, the export went from 189,000 pounds to 21 million pounds. By 1811, it went up to 42 million pounds. What did this achieve? Instead of lessening the need for slaves, it increased the demand. Money was rolling in. Let's face it. Money talks. The abolition societies of the South ceased to encourage gradual abolition and went completely out of existence. Slaves were worked even harder than before. To add to the degradation, the purchase of the Louisiana Territory in 1803, no offense if you're from Louisiana. The Louisiana Purchase introduced a region already well acquainted with the slavery under French and Spanish statute, especially in the lower tracts of the Mississippi Valley where they harvested rice, sugar, and cotton. The brutal overseer system of plantation management was introduced, and it thrived while its subjects suffered. The supply of slaves for this area could not keep up with the demand. What was the North doing during this time? The state constitutions of Vermont, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire abolished slavery. Gradual abolition was secured by state statute in Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. These are the states that constitute the Northwest Territory. They adopted abolition as they reached statehood. You can see that the North was making an abolition effort. So, if these states are free states, why did the slaves have to run in secrecy? Reclamation. Reclamation means, if they are caught, by law, they must be returned to their owners. Statutes regarding refugee slaves existed in America as early as 1643 with the New England Confederation. The Confederation was mostly organized to merge forces so the states could collectively work together to fight the Indians, but there was a reclamation clause attached. And then, in 1705, New York passed a measure designed to prevent runaways from fleeing to Canada. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 contained the first legislation by Congress for reclamation. It provided for the legal reclamation from the new territory of any person, and I quote, escaping into the same from whom labor or service is lawfully claimed in any one of the original states. At the same time, the Philadelphia Convention, which was framing the Constitution, acceded to the demand of Pierce Butler from South Carolina, and adopted his provision for the return of fugitives in more detail. No person held in service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered upon claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. No place in America was safe for a runaway slave. The first Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 laid a penalty of $500 for helping, interference, harboring, or concealing a slave. What amount do you suppose that would compare to at today's prices? Over $16,000. If people were fined for helping, they couldn't afford to pay the fine. They would lose their house, their land. What else did it bring? Rewards. Rewards for catching fugitives. And what do you suppose that brought? Slave catchers and bounty hunters. And along with the bounty hunters came their dogs. Persistent and fierce hunting dogs. These are a couple of actual reward posters. This is a gentleman who lived right outside of Reynoldsburg in Truro Township. And he was one of the first people in our township to be outspoken about his beliefs regarding abolition. His name is William Noe, pronounced Noe. Where have you seen No? You might pronounce it as No Bixby, but it's Noe Bixby Road. It is partially named after him. His mother's maiden name was Williams, which he acquired as his first name. He was heavily involved in the Underground Railroad helping slaves along their route to safety. Meet David and Nancy Graham. Their family has had a huge presence in Reynoldsburg history. They are most likely the namesakes for Graham Road. David and Nancy hid many slaves in the cellar of their home, and their house was considered one of the most prominent safe houses in town. They had 10 children and many of their descendants are current members of the Historical Society. Both of the Grahams are buried in the Presbyterian Historical Seceder Cemetery behind the Beebe Bop on State Route 256. The Graham house still stands and is now a private residence. It just so happens that Mary Turner Stutes graduated with a brother of the current owner, and she asked if she could bring over some members of the Graham family from out of state who were visiting, to tour the house. Their group was welcomed into the home, which the owners have decorated with a mixture of both vintage, as well as a modern style. The bedroom has the original wood beams in the ceiling and antique quilts. The dining room has a beautiful fireplace and the original wood floors. The kitchen is fairly current, but very welcoming with large windows. The family living room has original flooring and the original fireplace and mantel. Alexander W. Livingston was very active in the Underground Railroad. He hid many slaves in the outbuildings on his farm. By the way, Livingston Avenue was not named after Alexander W. Livingston. It was named for Colonel James Livingston, who fought in the Revolutionary War and was awarded 1,280 acres in the refugee land tract. Alexander W. Livingston had a large family. He had a total of 10 children, but the eldest died at the age of 2. Mr. Livingston would take his wife and 9 children to church on Sunday in a large wagon with benches in the back that they referred to as the Ark. But the Ark was also used during the week. In the dead of night, an employee of Mr. Livingston, Ben Patterson, would use the big wagon to haul fugitives east to Granville, then north toward Utica, Mount Vernon, and Freedom. Livingston has many outbuildings around his farm, so there were numerous places to hide. The primitive Baptist church congregation helped to hide slaves in the church basement. Though the railroad conductors didn't have much, they shared what they could to help the slaves to freedom. This is a building on Main Street that you might not recognize from this picture taken around 1920. How about when it was renovated in the early 1950s as a jewelry store? Today it is for sale, but it was recently renovated again into Tempe Tucco, then 4th and Goal. When it was renovated in the 1960s by the jeweler, Don Faltz, an underground tunnel was discovered off the cellar that led to a room with stones in the walls. This was a space to hide slaves. That tunnel has since been filled in. Meet Dr. Wilbur Henry Siebert, 1866 to 1961. He organized one of the most extensive historical collections on the Underground Railroad in the United States. Siebert served as a professor of history at Ohio State University from 1893 to 1935. This is one of his maps from 1898 that reflects the trails the slaves followed as they ran north. Please notice that he could not fit all of the text on his map. In fact, there is so much text that you can't see the map, so he simplified it. This version was created. What state has the most varicose veins? Ohio. Because we are the only state bordered on 2 sides by southern states, 3 sides by northern states, and the Great Lakes to the north. All of those red trails are the paths of the Underground Railroad. Professor Siebert decided to split the detailed information into individual state maps. And this is Dr. Siebert's map of Ohio. This the portion related to Reynoldsburg. Picture Ben Patterson collecting people from hiding places in the village as dusk passes. His destination was determined by many factors. First, the weather, then how many people were on the roads, and if there was room at his destination for more fugitives, etc. A buggy goes at an average of 6 miles per hour. First stop, Reynoldsburg to Granville, 24 miles equals 4 hours. A round trip to Granville would take all night, or 8 hours. Second stop, Utica. Reynoldsburg to Granville equals 24 miles, and 4 hours of travel. Granville to Utica equals 19 miles at 3 hours, or one way totaling 7 hours. A round trip to Utica would take at least 14 hours. An alternate longer trip would be to Mount Vernon. Reynoldsburg to Granville equals 24 miles in 4 hours. Granville to Mount Vernon equals 31 miles in 5 hours. That would be at least 9 hours one way and 18 hours for a round trip to Mount Vernon. If Ben was caught, he could lose his home, family, or possibly lose his life. But his life was only one, compared to all the people hidden in the wagon, and he was responsible for all the slaves hiding there. The Fugitive Slave Act was made law by the United States Congress on September 18, 1850. It was a part of the Compromise of 1850. It required that slaves who escaped but were caught had to be sent back to the slaver. The act also made officials and private citizens of free states cooperate in returning the escaped slaves. The act was part of the reason the northern states and southern states grew further apart, which led to the American Civil War. By 1860, only about 330 slaves were returned to their owners. The Fugitive Slave Acts were repealed on June 28, 1864, and slavery was abolished within the entire borders of the United States. So, there you have it. Do you have any questions? This is a picture of our museum, which is across the street from the Hannah J. Ashton building. I am going to give you several ways to reach me. I will leave this screen open, or you can pause the video if you would like to write them all down. Thank you for watching.